A week after I finished my last documentary, A Pandemic in New York, I ran across an article in the Wall Street Journal about a Washington, D.C. wireless technology company called SignalFrame. I learned that the U.S. Air Force Research Laboratory is testing SignalFrame's new software, which has the ability to sneak onto your smartphone in any number of clever ways. Then, once it's there, without you even knowing, it can detect and identify signals from any peripheral wireless devices in your general vicinity and send all that data back to its servers. According to the article, the company, in its marketing materials, claims to be able to distinguish a Fitbit from a Tesla from a home security device, recording when and where those devices appear in the physical world. SignalFrame's ever-expanding software platform of hacked smartphones is intended to be used as a window onto usage of hundreds of millions of computers, routers, fitness trackers, modern automobiles, and other network devices, known collectively as the Internet of Things. Illegal government spying on U.S. citizens was already bad enough, as we learned from Edward Snowden and other fearless whistleblowers. But now it's about to get exponentially worse. Imagine what a totalitarian regime could do with this sort of technology. And don't kid yourself that the whole world isn't careening toward technocratic totalitarianism. The year 2020 was your wake-up call. Could it record keystrokes as you're entering your username and password to access your brokerage account on a wireless keyboard? Probably. Could it turn on your Amazon Alexa, unbeknownst to you, to record your conversations? Or could it turn off your wireless home security system to facilitate a burglary while you're away? Sure, why not? Hell, it might even be able to burn down your house by bypassing the safety features on that new Alexa-controlled furnace in your basement. Or let's say you're one of those free-thinking malcontents who refuses to surrender to the dictates of a sociopathic predator class composed of central bankers, global capitalists, billionaire technocrats, and their craven enablers in the military-industrial media intelligence complex. Let's say you attend a state-forbidden rally to protest the demolition of our constitutional rights during a so-called pandemic that's really no more dangerous than a bad flu season. And let's say you drive there in a modern Mercedes with an Android smartphone that's been hacked by the latest software from SignalFrame. What could possibly go wrong? Well, for starters, that SignalFrame software could reveal the identity of anyone else attending the rally with a smartphone, which, let's face it, would be just about everyone. Access to smartphone GPS tracking systems could allow state authorities to know exactly where every protester has been and where they're heading. When you get back into your Mercedes to leave, those same authorities might access your onboard computer system to lock your car's doors and shut off the ignition, trapping you there until you can be arrested. Or they might pull a Michael Hastings and cybercarjack you while you're cruising along some palm tree-lined boulevard. With just a few keystrokes, they could redline your car's engine while the brakes are disabled, taking you on a Mr. Toad's wild ride through downtown LA until your car slams into a tree trunk at 120 miles an hour and explodes into flames. If you don't think that's possible, a page in the WikiLeaks Vault 7 release of classified CIA documents will explain how it's done. Later, you'll be found by the local police, charbroiled in your luxury automobile for having the gall to imagine you lived in a nation of free people.
The Obama administration has enshrined the two most radical principles of the Bush Doctrine. He enshrines killing people and spying on journalists as the two major tenets of his national security state.
I think the only recourse to this kind of behavior by the government is to say back to the government, we declare war on you.
Add to that the promised globe-spanning network of over 40,000 low Earth orbit 5G satellites, courtesy of Elon Musk. Then throw in near inescapable facial recognition technology, social credit scores, and digital currency that can be instantly switched off for targeted individuals. And it starts to become apparent that what's being rolled out is a worldwide inventory and control system that treats people like livestock, to be managed and harvested. You might conclude that the poet got it right when he wrote, "There is no place that does not see you. You must change your life." Many of us have now seen the illusory face of American democracy melted away to reveal the sinister, grinning, deep state skull beneath it. For some, it happened early, with the assassinations of the Kennedys and Martin Luther King. For others, the Oklahoma City bombing or 9/11 marked their point of no return.
Holy fuck! Oh my god! Oh my god! Jesus fucking Christ!
A younger generation has the media-driven shit show centered around Donald Trump and the coronavirus pandemic to disabuse them of any notions that the edicts from world leaders are always rational, or at least comprehensible.
I want to be nasty. Do you mind?
What are the masks, if not some nightmare capitulation to a predator-class planned dystopia? It's embarrassing to even see it. People walking around muzzled, as if in a dream, as if they had no choice. Fear porn eats the soul. But when you see past the fear and start to acknowledge what's really going on, you enter Chapel Perilous.
많이 무서웠죠.
Here's how that works. Let's say you're a guy who never married, but you've had a lot of girlfriends and dogs for company throughout your life. Your affections for the girlfriends ran hot and cold, depending on your mood, but the dogs you truly adored. You've named your latest dog Julio, and you like to send funny letters to people that usually start out with, "Hey dude," and end with Julio's fake signature, as if your dog was handling all the correspondence for you. So you have friends and a sense of humor. You also have an IT job that pays the bills without too much stress, and you own your own home in Nashville. Life is good, but you wouldn't call it great. Then your dad dies, and your brother dies, and you start to wonder, what's the point? The torment they went through as they neared death seemed evil to you, so you start to get into conspiracy theories in a big way. You've entered Chapel Perilous. According to Robert Anton Wilson, it's a sacred space where you'll be fucked with in mind-bending ways.
This is when something happens in your life and it all begins to fit together and make sense. Too much sense. Because it's coming from the exterior and it seems to either mean that you're losing your mind or you are somehow the central focus of a universal conspiracy that is leading you towards some unimaginable breakthrough.
Think of it as an initiation rite. You'll come out of it on the other side, either paranoid or agnostic. Wilson said there could be no other outcome. In my own experience, however, once I got past the initial shock of thinking the previously unthinkable, and then speaking the unspeakable, I settled into a low-simmering, prudent paranoia that feels like a middle path between full-blown paranoid delusions and an unshakable skepticism of all things spiritual. Joseph Campbell said psychotics drown where the mystics swim. In that sense, I'm just treading water. But that's not how it went for our guy in Nashville. He had a name, Anthony Quinn Warner. Some people later shortened that to Q Warn, for reasons you might have already guessed. Just after the winter solstice, Warner put several packages in the mail to people he trusted. Each contained a 9-page letter from Julio and a pair of Samsung USB drives.
"Hey dude, you'll never believe what I found in the park,"
Julio wrote, speaking on behalf of Warner.
"The knowledge I have gained is immeasurable. I now understand everything, and I mean everything, from what we are to what the known universe really is."
Julio then told his friends to watch the videos on the USB drives, ending the letter's introductory page with an encouraging The FBI decided to censor the remaining pages and the videos on the USB drives, perhaps because they revealed some discomforting truths. FBI Special Agent Jason Pack, who, for all we know, might be the disinfo agent equivalent of Jason Bourne, said the letter discussed several outlandish conspiracy theories, including the fun one that David Icke promotes, about how hateful, shape-shifting pedophile lizard people are in charge of the Earth. Mark Zuckerberg's one, just so you know. Agent Pack pulled some quotes from the letter out of context, as if to prove he wasn't just making shit up.
The moon landing and 9/11 have so many anomalies, they are hard to count,
Julio allegedly wrote. That doesn't sound insane to me at all, even coming from a talking dog. I suspect Agent Pack also knew he wasn't demonstrating a sufficient level of batshit craziness with that one, so he cranked it up a notch. He said Julio had also written that
September 2011 was supposed to be the end game for the planet,
because that was the year the aliens started attacking us. We just don't know anything about it yet, because the establishment media has been covering it up, and the aliens have already changed our DNA
and put a switch in the human brain so they could walk among us and appear human.
Okay, so that's getting a little out there. Still, there was no mention of 5G conspiracies or any other hint that Anthony Quinn Warner intended to blow himself up in his RV while it was parked in front of the Nashville AT&T building early on Christmas morning. But that's what he did. At least he was considerate about it, as suicide bombers go. He picked a day when almost no one was at work. He broadcast a 15-minute public service announcement warning all citizens to clear out of the area so they wouldn't be hurt. And then he ended the broadcast with a peppy, ironic song, Petula Clark's 1964 hit, Downtown, just before he blasted himself into eternity.
Everything is an illusion,
Julio wrote.
There's no such thing as death.
That's a bold statement, but Warner is now in a position to know whether he got it wrong or right. I've ended up thinking of him as a kinder, gentler version of Ted Kaczynski. He tried to avoid harming anyone but himself. Only 3 people suffered minor injuries when the RV exploded, so he can't be called a domestic terrorist, even though that term seems to be in vogue among pundits and politicians these days.
Don't dare call them protesters. They were a riotous mob, insurrectionists, domestic terrorists.
But it's fair to say Warner might have had a gripe with big tech and modern surveillance capitalism. He certainly won't go down in history as one of AT&T's most satisfied customers. Maybe he thought he was striking a blow against his exploiters. Or maybe his exploiters were using him as a pawn in a larger game. No one seems to know what became of Julio. I hope he'll write to tell us he's okay.
Hey guys, how we doing? We're in New York City. Sorry, we're in Washington, D.C. Look at that big old building there.
To protect the Constitution of the United States! man who's in the middle of something that he doesn't really understand. White light of love, the white light of harmony. Baby, I'm a man, and baby, I'm the only one who could ever hold me. Baby, won't you try to understand?
We won with poorly educated. I love the poorly educated. I win. Among the most dishonest people in the world.
They're bringing drugs. They're bringing crime. They're rapists.
The Capitol riot was an inside job, a massive photo op, a barbarians at the gate moment when the barbarians were allowed in by the Empire's own Praetorian Guard.
Oh, there we go!
If you know anything at all about the mighty, insidious powers of the U.S. intelligence community and the mighty, openly acknowledged powers of the U.S. military-industrial complex, then you can only shake your head in wonder and say, the deep state must have let this happen on purpose. Why'd they do it, you might ask? The first potential answer that springs to my mind is that they, meaning the deep state, the CIA-funded technocrats of Seattle and Silicon Valley, the shitlords of global capitalism, the dynastic, inbred families that rule the world's central banks, and maybe even Anthony Quinn Warner's lizard people. Let's just assume there's a they for the sake of argument. Well, they seem to want more control over the rest of us. Conveniently, the Capitol riot provided just the sort of justification that they need to implement draconian new laws that will criminalize speech, thought, creative expression, and the right of assembly. There's a precedent for this. It's hardly ever mentioned, but on 9/11 not a single anti-aircraft missile was fired when something, not necessarily a passenger plane, flew straight into the Pentagon, one of the most heavily defended buildings on Earth. We, as a nation, collectively lost our shit over that and allowed our constitutional rights and civil liberties to be stripped from us by the USA Patriot Act. Our few remaining rights and liberties will likely be shredded by a new set of laws that can be thought of as the Patriot Act 2.0. Although I'm sure they'll be calling it something else by the time it's signed into law by Joe Biden, who likes to brag that he was the author of the original Patriot Act.
You can ask the Attorney General this, because I got a call when he introduced the Patriot Act. He said, Joe, I'm introducing the act basically as you wrote it in 1994.
You can't speak truth to power when power decides what's true and censors everyone else who might have a dissenting view.
Come on, man. We have predators on our streets.
I was young. I was in my 20s, and he was 53 at the time.
I'd say lock the SOBs up. Increase the penalties. Increase them.
I would put the son of a gun in jail.
Put them to death.
Joe Biden. If you thought cancel culture was getting bad, it's about to get a whole lot worse.
Cancel culture is a dress rehearsal for mass murder. And if people accept people being disappeared from social media, then they will accept people being disappeared from the world.
Already, we've seen that goat-bearded dweeb, Jack Dorsey, block the President of the United States from using Twitter. Zuck the Lizard Boy then did the same shitty deed to him on Facebook. As if a popular, democratically elected president had no more right to be heard than Alex Jones.
I will eat your ass!
Do we really want a coven of autistic nerd wizards, headed by those two, telling us who gets to speak in a supposedly free society? Do we also think it's okay that Apple, Google, and Amazon colluded to deplatform Parler because it was acting as a free speech alternative to Twitter? When public companies start acting like arrogant monopolies, it's time to bust them up. And while we're on this subject, do we really want a backstabbing big tech CEO and out and proud eugenicist like Bill Gates to be the single largest farmland owner in America?
Is the world's largest private philanthropy causing harm? The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation has made millions of dollars each year from companies blamed for many of the same social and health problems the foundation seeks to address. Gates Foundation has investments in 69 of the worst polluting companies in the U.S. and Canada. Other companies in the foundation's portfolio have been accused of transgressions, including forcing thousands of people to lose their homes, supporting child labor, defrauding and neglecting patients in need of medical care. The Gates Foundation has not provided.
Here's another reason why they might have allowed an unorganized mob to storm the Capitol. They wanted to demonize the QAnon true believers and snuff out any hope for a populist rebellion by making populists and Q followers look like ridiculous losers. That would have been easy enough to accomplish with just a few secretly funded actors and double-agent ass clowns. With that in mind, I find it interesting that Jacob Chansley, aka Jake Angeli, the guy with the fur cap, the bison horns, and the attention-getting tattoos, now says he's willing to testify against Donald Trump in court.
I know what I'm doing. I'm military intelligence.
Chansley, the so-called Q shaman, was arrested on federal charges on January 9th. He's told the establishment press that he blames the former president for duping him into the Capitol insurrection.
A local attorney representing one of the most recognizable faces says his client is ready to turn on former President Trump.
My client has dealt with having to come to grips with the fact that he is not loved and considered a beautiful person by Trump. Lil Wayne is. The cronies of the president who were pardoned, they're beautiful. Mr. Trump loved them enough for a pardon. But there are people like my client who believed the president, they had his back, they did what he said, they did what they thought he wanted done based on the words of the president, and they're in jail.
How convenient is that? It's much easier to demonize QAnon followers when their most famous acolyte shows up in the chambers of the U.S. Senate looking like Baphomet with an ink fetish. Adam Johnson, the grinning hipster who stole Nancy Pelosi's podium, has also been arrested. Just like that turncoat Q shaman, he seemed to be begging for it. As a side note, I also found it kind of hilarious that Nancy Pelosi's son-in-law, a Dutch journalist, posed for pictures with the Q shaman outside the Capitol just before it was breached.
If they don't uphold the Constitution, then we will remove them from office one way or another.
I'm definitely not the only super soldier that we have, but I am, as far as I know, the only super soldier that's allowed to come forward in this way.
Okay, you know what's crazy? QAnon.
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 QAnon. QAnon. QAnon.
QAnon or Q.
Q is rumored to be a government agent who wants to help take back our formerly great nation from an elite group of Satan-worshipping globalists who use child sex trafficking and blackmail as a strange sort of currency.
The most far out of these beliefs say that celebrities and political elites actually farm children in underground caves so that they can drink blood, which supposedly staves off aging.
According to Q, during Trump's 4 years in office, he'd assembled a crack team to investigate swamp-like corruption and sex crimes against children being committed by high-level politicians, which could be explained away as a simple case of psychological projection, since Trump himself has been credibly accused of corruption and rape on multiple occasions. In one case, allegedly raping a 13-year-old girl at Jeffrey Epstein's Upper East Side mansion in New York.
There's an outstanding claim, a Jane Doe claim, that was filed right before the election by a woman in her 30s who said in the 90s, when she was 13, Donald Trump raped her in Jeffrey Epstein's townhouse in the Upper East Side. The veracity of that claim can be tested now by the Southern District. They're investigating what occurred in Jeffrey Epstein's townhouse. They should interview every woman who came in and out of that townhouse, including the woman that made this claim against the president right before the election. She withdrew her claim because she got death threats.
I've always thought of Q as a military intelligence psyop designed to make its followers passive and somewhat deranged by always telling them to trust the plan. We now know what came of that plan. Exactly nothing. Q had claimed Trump's Justice Department had tens of thousands of sealed indictments to take down evil Hollywood pedivores and globalist sex traffickers. But if those indictments truly existed, they were never unsealed. During his final days in office, Trump didn't even have the common decency to pardon Julian Assange, whose WikiLeaks releases had often provided hard evidence of real child sex trafficking operations by evil globalists. You know, like the crap DynCorp was pulling in Bosnia and Afghanistan. According to certain media pundits, there's an overlap between what the Q followers believe and what the lizard people conspiracy theorists like Anthony Quinn Warner believe. Again, this seems incredibly convenient for the predator class. They can get off the hook by pointing out how blatantly crazy QAnon and Anthony Quinn Warner turned out to be, while using big tech to censor or discredit all the evidence of child sex trafficking and pedophilia among their ranks. Which, let's face it, is something that's going on all the time. Just ask that sweaty dancer, Prince Andrew.
Silence, wench. I do not wish to be horny anymore. I just want to be happy.
I suspect Anthony Quinn Warner might still be alive somewhere, living the good life with a Black Ops-funded American Express Centurion card to pay for everything as a reward for his services. Maybe he's lounging on a beach with his dog Julio in the same tropical paradise where Jeffrey Epstein ended up. The Nashville bombing and the Capitol riot amounted to a 1-2 punch of propaganda that left the American people woozy enough to accept something like the new normal war on domestic terrorism. Or as I've started to think of it, the Phoenix program coming home to roost.
What did the Phoenix program come to symbolize, at least for you?
A computerized genocide program.
Tonight, show him how much lovelier your hair can look after a luster cream shampoo. How do they do it, you'll say?
Let's turn back the clock about 24 hours and drop in on Mr. and Mrs. Johnson.
How do they do it, you'll say?
Let's turn back the clock about 24 hours and drop in on Mr. and Mrs. Johnson.
The crusade for freedom is your chance and mine to fight communism. The crusade for freedom is your chance and mine to fight communism.
America is back. America is back.
We begin bombing in 5 minutes.
On January 20th, we watched as Joe Biden and Lady Gaga delivered our nation back into the safe hands of Google and Goldman Sachs. Still somewhat freaked out by the Capitol riot, the predator class turned the inauguration into an elites-only event that took place behind tall police barricades, patrolled by over 15,000 underpaid men and women in the National Guard, many of them forced to sleep in shifts inside unheated Washington, D.C. parking garages.
There are more people at the West Palm Beach airport waiting for Trump than there are here at the inauguration. Truly an incredible time in our history. You know, I've been to past inaugurations for W and Trump. You know, there were 500,000 to 1 million people at each event. It's eerie, you know. It's the first time Biden got thousands of people to his event, but they're all National Guardsmen who were forced to be here.
It was a telling portrait of America's smug, bipartisan kleptocracy, at a time when inequality rages and the corporate takeover of global governance seems unstoppable.
Please welcome Lady Gaga.
How come
plastic.
What is it?
A Judascope. Didn't you ever see one?
No, what does it do?
Watch and you'll find out. See, when they get to the slaughterhouse, he ducks to one side and the silly sheep go in to get their throats cut. That black devil knows it.
The vaccines are safe.
It's right there in our faces, for those who have eyes to see it. A regressive neoliberal agenda is being installed with the blunt force of propaganda and medical martial law. The end goal is to reshape our world into a neo-feudal dystopia controlled by artificial intelligence, transhumanist billionaires, and technocratic overlords.
Where's your tattoo? Good question.
Bill Gates wants us to eat bugs and drink turd water and like it, while he dines on Kobe beef and dims the sun.
Alexa, does Bill Gates kill people?
Here's something I found on the web. According to marketoracle.co.uk, Bill Gates works for the drug companies now, and what he meant was that vaccines can be used to kill off a certain couple of billion people.
Did you hear that? My account's gonna get banned in it.
Roughly half of all Americans were primed to see the 2020 election results as rigged, no matter which side won. It seems that was intended. A nation divided is easier to demolish, and that's what we're witnessing now, the controlled demolition of American society. I would argue that it's been going on at least as far back as the 1980s, when Ronald Reagan kicked off the steep rise in wealth inequality by decreasing taxes for the rich, while eliminating government regulations that have been put into place to protect the common good from corporate malfeasance. But equally strong arguments could be made that the corporate coup d'etat of America really began when Woodrow Wilson handed off control of the economy to the bankers with the Federal Reserve Act of 1913. Or when capitalism's invisible army decided to hijack America's foreign policy with the assassination of JFK. Regardless of how it started, this is where we've ended up. A study by the Rand Corporation recently found that if Americans had participated in the economic growth of their nation in the same way they'd shared in the economic gains from World War II to the mid-1970s, today's average full-time worker, earning $50,000 a year, would instead be earning roughly double that amount. After 45 years of rising income inequality, America's richest 10% now essentially steals $2.5 trillion from the other 90% of Americans every year. The so-called pandemic made those figures look even worse. In 2020, the wealth of the world's billionaires increased by 20%, more than in any previous year in history. That amounted to $1.9 trillion being redistributed from the public purse into the pockets of about 2,200 self-aggrandizing assholes who were already rich enough not to need it. But over the course of that same year, unemployment claims reached catastrophic levels, and over 250 million people across the globe became severely malnourished as a result of the lockdowns and other restrictions, which have shown no statistically significant benefit in reducing COVID's spread, while bankrupting millions of small businesses and driving tens of millions of workers and entrepreneurs into destitution. What's good for Bill Gates and Jeff Bezos isn't so great for the rest of us.
You never want a serious crisis to go to waste. And what I mean by that is an opportunity to do things that you think you could not do before.
Using the COVID crisis as an excuse, governments around the world, urged on by their shadowy financial partners, have been massively expanding the tools of totalitarianism, penetrating and influencing every aspect of our private lives, our social lives, and our biological existence with new technologies and regulations.
Don't let Fauci catch you spreading misinformation.
My daddy says the virus is a hoax perpetrated by the deep state.
Whoa.
And the vaccine has tiny microchips so they can track.
See you later.
Most people seem to be naively complying with that pathologized technocratic nightmare agenda without even pausing to ask why it's happening. or who benefits, or what we might be doing to stop it.
What the fourth industrial revolution will lead to is a fusion of our physical, our digital, and our biological identities.
It's the little compromises and acts of mindless compliance that end up ensnaring us, and the little moral lapses that end up gnawing on our souls. You don't succumb to the cult of totalitarianism all at once. As C.J. Hopkins wrote, it creeps up on you, little by little lie by little lie, accommodation by accommodation, rationalization by rationalization, until one day you find yourself taking orders from some twisted little narcissistic nihilist on a mission to remake the entire world. Let's say you're a doctor who's smart enough to figure out on your own that lysosomotropic agents like hydroxychloroquine and ivermectin can effectively treat early-stage COVID-19 and other airborne coronaviruses carrying weird bioengineered spike proteins. You can see through the propaganda and all the attempts to falsify medical literature. You know the new mRNA vaccines are unnecessary and potentially harmful to the human body's immune system. We'll skip the lecture on antibody-dependent enhancement. Anyone can look it up if they're curious. But when your employer, a famous New York hospital care system, tells you you're forbidden from prescribing those lysosomotropic agents and demands instead that you start pushing the new COVID vaccines, well,
shut up.
You say nothing.
Be cool.
And you do as you're told.
Be like my friend Lewis here, all right? Oh, lost his brain.
Some of your patients might get sick or die, but you don't want to risk losing your job.
We were always told, no, you can't treat viruses, that those we don't have antimicrobial agents for them, and that's not been true, and they've never been told that.
So across the generations, science and medicine are still saying you cannot treat a virus. The only way forward is a vaccine, which is what we've all been waiting for. And we've had this crazy situation where when doctors have done their research like you and used ivermectin, or especially used hydroxychloroquine, and perhaps maybe that would have gone on to be much more successful had the President of the United States never mentioned it, because then it became a political football and nobody could go near it because we couldn't have Donald Trump be right about something, I think is what it seemed to be. But, you know, I had a moment, you talked about Vladimir Zelenko. I ran into him. He had just published now, he says over 1,000 patients, I think, that he treated with hydroxychloroquine, azithromycin, and zinc. It's called the Zelenko Protocol. It's being tested and studied all over the world. He's had amazing success, yet there are still states that don't allow it at all. This is what he had to say about that.
There are two risk factors why people die from COVID. It's the state that you live in and the doctor you choose. And the reason why I say that is that certain parts of this country are obstructing the flow of life-saving information and life-saving medication. The data shows that if you treat high-risk patients within the first 5 days of onset of symptoms, the majority of them, more than 84% that would have ended up in the hospital, don't. So let me just give you what that actually means. That out of the 300,000 dead Americans, let's say, we could have prevented 250,000 people from dying. 250,000 people. Yeah. And we could have prevented the shutdown. We could have even prevented the psychological trauma that everyone's living through.
Right. 250,000 people could be saved is what he believes. Do you see it the same way? Did somebody actually decide to murder, in my mind, innocent people? He went on to say in that video, it's a crime against humanity. What is your perspective?
I absolutely think that's true. I think what he said was exactly right. And actually, there was an online study that looked at all these countries. And what they did was they looked at the countries that used hydroxychloroquine early and frequently versus the countries that did not. And it was a 78% decrease in mortality if you were in one of those countries that routinely used hydroxychloroquine. You know, I looked at the numbers. In New York State, the percent per capita death from COVID in New York State was 0.17%. So it's still, you had a 99.83 chance of survival in New York State, but a 0.17%. Contrast that with Nigeria. Nigeria, a third world sub-Saharan African country, and the death rate was 0.00004%, 10,000 times less. What's the difference? Well, I had a patient of mine from there, and a patient from Senegal, same story. And they told me that they have hydroxychloroquine over the counter. When they get a fever, they're so used to malaria there, they get a fever, they just go down to the corner drugstore and they pick up some hydroxychloroquine and they take it for a few days or however, and it's gone. And that is a sad commentary.
The deadly COVID-19 just disappeared.
Right. It's a deadly commentary on all this. And, and I had, exactly the same thought you did, Del, about it's just Orange Man bad. That's why they were against this. But I got to tell you, I don't think that's why I wrote that paper. I think there's much more to it than that. Okay. Because we knew by the way, doctors knew about this before Trump even mentioned it. Because like I say, we'd been on our computers reading. That's what we do for a living. We study. So we knew about that. So it wasn't just that. I think the other, because it was so much bigger than that. The second thought I had was, well, if you have a treatment for something, then clearly you don't need a vaccine program. And if this treats other viruses, for example, I found a 2004, I believe, article from Chinese researchers saying chloroquine inhibits influenza A in vitro, meaning the flu virus could be stopped by this. That's when my head exploded and I said, oh, that's what this is all about. They don't want their $69 billion a year vaccine industry to go to zero, because you won't have to, if this actually treats all sorts of viruses, you won't have to be taking vaccines. I'm a former military surgeon, and I have to say, I think there's a lot of psyop. We're probably at war here, and there's a lot of things going on, and they don't really want us to know about treatment, because if you have treatment, then you cannot be terrorized by by lab-produced viruses. And that's a big one. That is really a big one. Look at what's happened to our nation. Our nation wasn't taken down by a virus, it was taken down by fear. If you have treatment, the fear goes away. Right. And I think in favor of that argument is, did you see the hydroxychloroquine plant in Taiwan that just burned down? And they said it was all chemical by accident. Right. But we've had two other plants last May that all down that also produced precursors for hydroxychloroquine.
Oh, hi, Mark. That you need to focus and try not to let stuff bother you as much as possible. But it is going to bother you because you're human, and I was human.
Maybe, as another example, you're the chairman and CEO of a gigantic social media company with ties to the U.S. intelligence community that go much deeper than almost anyone knows. You, of all people, should have fuck you money, but you lost your ability to say fuck you to your controllers long ago. In private, you've expressed some concerns about the new COVID vaccines to your staff.
I do just want to make sure that I share some caution on this, because we just don't know the long-term side effects of basically modifying people's DNA and RNA to directly encode in a person's DNA and RNA, basically the ability to produce those antibodies, and whether that causes other mutations or other risks downstream.
But in public, your company is famous for censoring educated, compassionate people like Robert F. Kennedy Jr., Del Bigtree, and America's frontline doctors who voice those same concerns.
Facebook says it would remove any content that, quote, claims the COVID-19 vaccine changes people's DNA. So when Zuckerberg said, quote, basically, the vaccine is modifying people's DNA, it seems pretty clear modifying is synonymous with changing. Again, Zuckerberg would be banned from Facebook for saying this. In fact, this video of me showing the CEO of Facebook talking might be banned because he is violating Facebook's policy. Seems a little bit hypocritical, don't you think?
Why is the digital intelligence complex seemingly so intent on injecting everyone in the world with mRNA vaccines? You can't allow the public to know the real reason for that if you want to hold on to your billions. Here's a clue. Messenger RNA can be programmed to make proteins in the human body. It helps to think of mRNA as a sort of computer chip that can be plugged into a 3D printer. The mRNA vaccine tells your body what to make, and your body prints it out. In that sense, worldwide mandatory mRNA vaccination amounts to biohacking the human race. And how might that benefit the coming global biosecurity state? I'll leave that to your imagination for now.
You can basically do anything with synthetic RNA, DNA. It's like a computer program. So I mean, I think with enough, with effort that's not too crazy, you could probably stop aging, reverse it if you want. These are, you can basically do it. You can turn someone into a freaking butterfly if you want with the right DNA sequence.
Compromises and ethical failings aren't just limited to doctors and Mark Zuckerberg, of course. They belong to all of us. The management consultant who secretly thrills to ripping people off with complex financial transactions that leave a trail of bankrupted businesses in his wake. The career politician whose steady advancement is contingent upon how far she'll go to defraud, impoverish, and criminalize the people she was elected to represent. The journalists who knowingly promulgate lies to please the dozen or so billionaire puppet masters who control about 90% of the mainstream media outlets in the U.S.
Whoever controls the media controls the population, and that's us. We're the elite. We control the media, and therefore we control you.
You've got to pick a pocket or two. You've got to pick a pocket or two, boys. You've got to pick a pocket or two.
You're not immune to that sort of moral indifference, even if you claim to be representing the exploited and the oppressed. For instance, let's say you're a Black Lives Matter protester who turns up at the Capitol riot. You happen to be in the right place at the right time with a video camera, shouting,
"Is this not going to be the best film you've ever made in your life?"
just before you record Ashley Babbitt getting shot in the neck. Later that same day, CNN and NBC will pay you $70,000 for your insider's view of the riot, and you'll get to go on TV to be interviewed by that crazy rich ex-CIA intern, now flying at great heights in the Mockingbird media, Anderson Cooper. If that's not selling out to your oppressors, how else should it be described?
They killed the girl. I did ask how they're on camera. They shot her.
Okay, so maybe I wasn't playing fair with that last example. Wild-eyed John Sullivan was likely an agent provocateur from the start. But you get the point.
I guess we're all done, yeah, so fuck it.
To live in the world is to be implicated in its evils. There's no escaping it while we're in the global throes of late-stage capitalism, watching the Fourth Industrial Revolution slouch out of Davos, trailing gory afterbirth. It's a rigged game that encourages the worst sociopaths among us to rise to the top. What we're witnessing now is a breakaway civilization that's figuring out how to dispense with the human capital that's becoming surplus to its needs. Those who will be left behind.
Didn't you know, Billy Boy? The rich have always sucked off low-class shit like you.
It's just a fuzzy, dismal memory.
What they're going for is a transhumanist system, and what they're going to do initially is they're going to go for a kind of guaranteed basic income idea.
For some. For others, you can run down their family net worth. So you can run out their current net worth. So they're going to harvest, they're going to try and harvest that. And other people they're going to cull. Let's be real honest, what we saw in New York, we saw culling. So we're seeing people literally targeted and killed. And it wouldn't surprise me if you look what they did in New York, if that was basically an insurance relief act. Because you've got the long-term care insurance industry in real trouble. Their payouts are skyrocketing. And you've got the same problem with Medicare, Social Security. So we're watching a culling. And my concern on the next 4 years is that culling going to accelerate?
Catherine, it seems like you're spelling out their end game here. There's a kind of shock and awe that we're seeing that's being deployed by the globalist syndicate. How do you see this all playing out?
Right now, we have two different visions. And one vision is a vision of life and living things, where we are connecting and resonating electromagnetically with all life, with the birds, with the trees, with each other. What they're trying to implement is a system where life is not allowed to resonate. You've got to social distance, you've got to wear a mask, you've got to, your body's got to be filled with little things that allow you to be a receiver, you've got to walk around with your surveillance device and be mind controlled. And they're trying to break all life down into something that can resonate with their machine.
Right.
And it can be hooked up on the AI and software, and it can teach the robots how to do all the human jobs, you know, and basically they're trying to take all the connections in life and put a toll booth between them and recircuit the thing into their machine. Now, if you look at the design of what they're trying to do, it's hard for most people to fathom because it's, if you understand life, it's so psychopathic, it's unbelievable.
Mm-hmm.
And you got to give them credit because the hubris is off the charts. But that's what it's about. And so ultimately, you know, part of the issue of sovereignty is our, you know, not just are our physical bodies sovereign, are our minds sovereign, but is our electromagnetic space sovereign.
Right.
Because a lot of the manipulation is working through this. They are trying to assert electromagnetic control of our body and our intelligence.
It's not like the Internet of Things, it's intelligent evil dust.
If you look at the allegations of human experimentation done by the Germans during World War II, it doesn't hold a candle to this. You're talking about massive poisoning human experimentation on the entire global population.
Anybody's intelligent thinking, to most people who would consider themselves intelligent beings, that say, well, that's absurd. What's all this doomsday stuff? What's all this prophetic stuff? You know, intelligent human beings should realize that everything has their cycle. They have their season.
Breakaway civilization. The return of the Phoenix program. This is odd and ominous stuff to be talking about. It might even come across as unbelievable if you don't have a grounding in the history of previous attempts to control the masses, inevitably overseen by greedy, ruthless bastards who don't know the meaning of enough. That history is getting more difficult to find now that we're living in a post-truth world where we're so saturated with propaganda and stifled by censorship. The critical thinking outside the cartoonishly drawn lines of establishment narratives is becoming vanishingly rare.
Epstein, is it?
Epstein's son.
Good work.
Fortunately, there's a widely accepted and institutionally supported propagator of conspiracy theories who can provide us with just that sort of forbidden history in a breezy, entertaining way that doesn't require a lot of intellectual heavy lifting.
This is a story about Adam Curtis, an award-winning documentary producer who tells stories for the BBC. As narrator for his own documentaries, Curtis would have us believe that various cabals of elite politicians and planners have attempted to impose order on the world with some very bad ideas.
What the Reagan administration were doing, both with Colonel Gaddafi and with the UFOs, was a blurring of fact and fiction. But it was part of an even broader programme. The President's advisers had given it a name. They called it perception management, and it became a central part of the American government during the 1980s. The aim was to tell dramatic stories that grabbed the public imagination, not just about the Middle East, but about Central America and the Soviet Union. And it didn't matter if the stories were true or not, providing they distracted people, and you, the politician, from having to deal with the intractable complexities of the real world.
Some of those ideas borrowed from John Nash's schizophrenia-inspired game theory, and from R.D. Laing's cranky psychiatric musings.
Is freedom possible? Is the truth possible? Is it possible to be one's actual self with another human being? Is it possible to be a human being anymore? Is it possible to be a person? Do persons even exist?
Others were borrowed from the mind control methods developed for the CIA's MK Ultra project by Dr. Ewan Cameron, and from Edward Bernays' pitiless use of propaganda as a public relations tool for corporate enrichment.
Ultimately, he was reshaping reality, reshaping public opinion in a way that's undemocratic and manipulative.
Curtis evinces a quizzical, very British astonishment that those powerful politicians and planners had failed to anticipate how the very bad ideas would lead to unhappy consequences for the masses. Oh dear, he often seems to be saying. But rather than pause to consider how bad ideas might have been promoted by the powerful simply because they were useful to a corrupt, coercive corporatocracy bent on consolidating its global power, Curtis instead jump cuts to some dodgy video clip from the BBC archives and starts talking about how this or that semi-obscure person or event might be tangentially related to his main thesis. What then happens is that Curtis seemingly explains, with his strange digressions and brilliant editing, how the technocratic forces oppressing society today were first embodied in Lee Harvey Oswald's Marine Corps pal Kerry Thornley.
Her name was Eris.
Chairman Mao's vengeful harridan of a wife, Jiang Qing, and Tupac Shakur's crack-addicted mum.
A powerful example of how an individual could challenge those in power and win.
But this was a fantasy. In fact, he had created the televisual equivalent of a drunken late-night Wikipedia binge with pretensions to narrative coherence. Combining archived documentary material with interviews, Curtis filled in the gaps by vomiting grainy library footage onto the screen to a soundtrack of Brian Eno and Nine Inch Nails. He had discovered that it did not matter what footage he used, so long as he changed the shots so bewilderingly fast that the audience didn't notice the chasm between argument and conclusion. This was especially effective when he simply cut the music mid-bar.
And as a result, Joe Biden and Lady Gaga were swept to power in the next American election. The UK-based website Media Lens sent an email to Adam Curtis, accusing him of engaging in exactly the kind of deceptive spin practices that Edward Bernays had used to camouflage the truth about big business control. The following clip from Curtis's The Century of the Self, The Engineering of Consent, was cited as a prime example.
Politicians and planners came to believe that Freud was right to suggest that hidden deep within all human beings were dangerous and irrational desires and fears. They were convinced that it was the unleashing of these instincts that had led to the barbarism of Nazi Germany. To stop it ever happening again, they set out to find ways to control this hidden enemy within the human mind.
Media Lens opined that this was bullshit. Nothing, they said, could be further from the truth. Post-1945, as now, the true fear of politicians and planners everywhere was that popular desires for equity, justice, and a functioning democracy could result in a democratic threat to elite control of society. The elites themselves were guilty of deploying Nazi-style barbarism throughout the Third World. Time and again, Media Lens observed, interventions sold to the public as struggles against communism turned out to be struggles for Western profits against independent nationalism supported by impoverished people. The cost in human suffering has been beyond belief, literally millions of people killed, tortured, and disappeared.
So this is what they call democracy. Killing us like we are nothing.
No, man, no.
They are not numbers, they are lives. Where is the justice?
In short, Media Lens argued that Curtis's documentaries gave no indication of just how all-powerful and corrupting business propaganda has become in government, in schools, in the corporate media, in culture generally. Ultimately, Curtis was keeping a lid on the ideas and understanding that have the power to wake people up. Exactly the kind of thing that Bernays and all PR gurus ever since have worked tirelessly to keep from the public.
We will tell you what to say.
Surprised? We're not.
Media Lens received no rebuttal to their accusations from Curtis, but...
Meanwhile, in America, a strange and brilliant cameraman was shooting stock footage of Death Valley, California. Curtis implied that this was somehow relevant to the labyrinthine argument he was constructing. His audience believed that it would turn out to be of crucial significance. But this was a fantasy. Curtis never returned to Death Valley, or the cameraman. He had discovered that they did not matter, because 5 minutes later, his audience had simply forgotten about them. But this did not matter, because Curtis spoke with such an impeccable, authoritative BBC manner that the audience took even gross generalizations and unsupported value judgments to be the absolute truth. They simply went along with it.
We got a drug, we're gonna try that on you. We'll make you die, it'll get you just a little bit sick. Got a head cold, got a chest cold, and a too late go. You're not forever, make a heyday, make a lay, got a crazy for days and days and days and days and days and years. Well, they got the time now to stay on the job. Double up the dosage in water supply, make you even sicker than you're slipping away. Get it on your friends, get it on your friends, you can't get it up and us on the microphone. No! The government will! The government will! The government will! Swimming abroad, keep slowing down the USSR. But meanwhile, we'll keep an eye on what it's doing to you. Got a head cold, got a chest cold, and a string head cold. Going on forever, make a heyday, make a lay, got a crazy. For days and 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 you!